This story is titled, "My Mom and Dad Spoiled Their Golden Sibling and Never Punished Him for Anything Unlike Me." So I packed my bags and moved to another city. Years later, they found my house begging for forgiveness and financial help. Hey Reddit, I'm 29 years old now, living in Tampa, Florida, and I need to tell you about a 13-year journey through absolute family dysfunction and abuse. This is the story of how my older brother Derek completely destroyed my teenage years, how my parents enabled every bit of his cruelty, and how they all showed their true colors when my uncle got sick. But most importantly, this is about how karma eventually delivered the most perfect payback when they least expected it. Let me paint you a picture of what growing up in my house was actually like, because most people can't even imagine this level of systematic torture within a family. My older brother Derek is 30 years old now, but back then he was basically a 6'3" sociopath with a wrestling scholarship and absolutely zero conscience. He's 3 years older than me and built like he could deadlift a Honda Civic without breaking a sweat. What made him truly terrifying wasn't just his size, though. It was this dead-eyed predator stare that could make prison guards nervous. The kid was legitimately unhinged, but everyone in our community thought he was destined to be the next big wrestling champion. What Derek put me through wasn't just random sibling rivalry or typical brother conflicts. This guy had turned torturing me into a sophisticated art form, and he approached it with the same dedication most people reserve for their careers. Take what happened with Isabella Rodriguez, for example. She was this girl I'd been crushing on since middle school, and I had spent literal months working up the courage to ask her to winter formal. It was a big deal for me. I had never asked anyone to a dance before, and Isabella seemed like she might actually say yes. Derek found out about my plan somehow, and he immediately decided this was going to be prime entertainment for him. The bastard waited until lunch period when the cafeteria was absolutely packed with students. Then he walked up to Isabella's table with this confident swagger, making sure I was watching from across the room. "Hey, Isabella," he said loud enough for half the school to hear. "My little brother's been stalking you for months, but he's too much of a coward to ask you out himself. How about you go with a real man instead?" Isabella said yes immediately, and honestly, who wouldn't? Derek was the star wrestler, popular, confident, and everything I wasn't. But here's the thing that made it truly evil. Derek made absolutely sure I was watching when he asked her. He maintained direct eye contact with me the entire time, like he was marking his territory or proving some twisted point about hierarchy. Then, just to twist the knife deeper, he dumped Isabella 2 days before the actual dance and told everyone at school that she was just practice for his little brother's leftovers. The story spread through school like wildfire, how Derek had to ask out girls for his pathetic little brother who couldn't handle potential rejection. The humiliation was complete and public, and Derek had orchestrated every single detail of it. Or take what happened when I finally made the junior varsity basketball team as a sophomore. I had been practicing shots in our driveway for 2 solid years, working on my form every single day after school. I wasn't naturally athletic like Derek, but I had decent fundamentals, and the coach thought I had real potential for improvement. Making the team on that Wednesday felt like the biggest accomplishment of my life up to that point. Friday morning, Coach Martinez pulled me aside with this uncomfortable expression on his face. He explained that there had been complications, and that having both brothers on teams at the same time would create favoritism issues within the athletic department. Derek had convinced him that it would be problematic and unfair to other students. I got cut before playing a single game, watching my dreams evaporate while Derek continued playing varsity and literally waved at me during timeouts with this sick, satisfied grin on his face. The psychological warfare Derek employed was absolutely next level, and he seemed to take genuine pleasure in finding new ways to undermine my confidence. When I trained for months preparing for this local 10K race, running every single morning before school and meticulously tracking my times in a notebook, Derek saw it as another opportunity to mess with my head. I had been genuinely excited about this race. It was something I was actually good at, and I had been steadily improving my pace week after week. Race day arrived, and I was feeling confident about my chances of placing respectably in my age group. That's when Derek showed up at the starting line in full running gear, having never mentioned any interest in participating. For the entire 6.2 miles, Derek ran right beside me, providing this constant stream of psychological commentary designed to break my concentration. "You always breathe like that when you run?" he would ask with fake concern. "Dad's going to be really embarrassed if you collapse in front of all these people." When the final stretch came around, Derek suddenly sprinted past me like I was standing completely still, raising his arms in victory as he crossed the finish line well ahead of me. He spent the next month telling everyone who would listen how he had to deliberately slow down his natural pace so he wouldn't embarrass his little brother too badly. According to Derek's version of events, he was just being a good big brother by giving me a fighting chance. But the absolute worst thing Derek did was systematically destroy my confidence with girls, making sure I would never develop normal social skills or romantic relationships during those crucial teenage years. There was Sophie Kim, this brilliant girl in my AP chemistry class who seemed genuinely interested in talking to me about science experiments and theoretical concepts. We had been lab partners for several weeks, and our conversations were starting to extend beyond just academic topics. I was actually starting to think she might like me as more than just a study partner. When Derek discovered that Sophie and I had planned a study session at our house, he showed up completely uninvited and inserted himself into the situation. He spent the entire afternoon telling Sophie embarrassing stories about me, sharing intimate details that no brother should ever reveal. He told her about how I used to wet the bed until I was 12 years old, how I had never actually kissed a girl despite being in high school, and various other humiliating childhood incidents that he had somehow cataloged in his memory for exactly these purposes. Sophie went from being genuinely interested in spending time with me to looking completely uncomfortable and eager to leave. She never spoke to me again outside of the absolute minimum required for class requirements, and I could see in her eyes that she now viewed me as this pathetic, damaged kid rather than someone worth getting to know. Derek had successfully poisoned another potential relationship before it could even begin. The physical abuse was constant and carefully calculated to inflict maximum pain without leaving the kind of evidence that would get Derek in trouble with his coaches or jeopardize his college recruitment prospects. Derek had actually studied exactly how to hurt people efficiently. He knew which techniques would leave me dry heaving from gut punches without creating visible bruising, how to apply joint locks that made me see stars, but didn't cause any permanent damage that could be documented, and wrestling moves that were just convenient excuses to grind my face into the carpet or slam me into walls. His absolute favorite was something he called motivation sessions down in our basement during his regular workout routine. Derek would corner me while he was lifting weights and use me as a practice dummy, all while delivering these crushing psychological beatdowns that were somehow worse than the physical pain. "You know, my dad introduces me as his son but introduces you as Derek's little brother," he would say while grinding my face into the workout mat. "It's because you're not actually worth claiming as his own." The most devastating part of all this was that my parents saw everything that was happening and treated it like it was just natural selection in action. When I would complain about Derek stealing my lunch money on a daily basis, my mother would dismiss it by saying, "Derek's just toughening you up. Boys need to learn hierarchy early in life, or they'll never succeed in the real world." She genuinely believed that what Derek was doing to me was some kind of valuable life lesson. My father was even worse than my mother when it came to enabling Derek's behavior. He actively encouraged what Derek was doing, framing it as important leadership development and character building. "Good job keeping him motivated," Dad would tell Derek after particularly brutal sessions in the basement. "Real leaders know how to push their team to be better, and that's exactly what you're doing for your brother." The favoritism in our household was so extreme that it felt like I was living in some kind of parallel universe where normal rules of fairness and justice simply didn't apply. Derek got a brand new Ford Mustang for his 16th birthday. Not used, not borrowed, but a gleaming new car that cost more than most people make in a year. When I asked for $10 for the bus to get to my part-time job, I was told to earn what you want, and that handouts would only make me weak and entitled. Derek could throw parties that literally destroyed half the house, leaving broken furniture, holes in walls, and damages that cost thousands to repair. But instead of getting in trouble, my parents would actually thank him for being social and building important networks for his future. They saw his destructive behavior as evidence that he was a natural leader who knew how to bring people together. Meanwhile, I would get grounded for an entire week for leaving a single plate in the kitchen sink overnight. When Derek's grades started slipping during his junior year because he was spending more time partying than studying, my parents immediately hired expensive private tutors and blamed his teachers for not understanding the unique scheduling demands of student athletes. They spent hundreds of dollars every month making sure Derek had every possible academic advantage. When I maintained a 3.9 GPA while working weekends to pay for my own school supplies and expenses, they told me it should be higher, and that maybe I needed to focus more on school instead of wasting time on those computer hobbies that would never amount to anything. The double standard became absolutely insane when it came to disciplinary issues. Derek got suspended for putting some kid in the hospital during wrestling practice, and this wasn't an accident or a normal sports injury. This was Derek completely losing his temper and going full psychopath on someone who had the audacity to score a point against him during practice. My parents hired expensive lawyers and threatened to sue the school, the coach, and anyone else involved for discriminating against their son and jeopardizing his athletic career. When I got jumped by 3 seniors for the crime of being Derek's weird little brother, I came home with a black eye and a split lip that required stitches. Instead of being concerned about my safety or outraged that their son had been attacked, my parents spent 20 minutes interrogating me about what I had done to bring this violence on myself. They wanted to know if I'd provoked these boys somehow, if I had been running my mouth about things I shouldn't have been discussing, and whether I had learned my lesson about keeping a lower profile at school. The message from my parents was crystal clear and had been consistent throughout my entire childhood. Derek was the investment, the future, the son they were proud to claim. I was the mistake they had to tolerate until I turned 18 and became someone else's problem to deal with. They weren't even subtle about it. They would openly discuss Derek's bright future and promising prospects while talking about me like I was some kind of burden they couldn't wait to be rid of. But there was one person in my entire extended family who treated me like I actually mattered, like I was a human being worthy of respect and attention. Uncle Stephen was my father's younger brother, and he was everything my father wasn't. Successful without stepping on other people, confident without being cruel, and genuinely interested in what I had to say instead of constantly comparing me to Derek's accomplishments. Stephen owned a construction company that he had built from absolutely nothing after getting out of the army with no connections and very little money. He specialized in custom homes and had developed a reputation for quality work that kept him booked solid for months in advance. Stephen had a crew of guys who had been with him for years, which told me everything I needed to know about what kind of boss and person he was. He lived in this incredible house that he had designed and built himself, showcasing the kind of craftsmanship that comes from someone who genuinely loves what they do. Stephen started having me over every other weekend when I turned 14, teaching me construction techniques and mechanical skills in his amazing workshop. This guy had every tool you could possibly imagine, from basic hand tools to sophisticated power equipment that most professional contractors couldn't afford. For a kid who loved building things and understanding how stuff worked, it was like having access to paradise. More importantly, it was somewhere Derek wasn't allowed to follow me. My parents had initially tried to make these visits about both boys, suggesting that Derek could benefit from learning some practical skills alongside his athletic training. But Stephen shut that down immediately and made it clear that these weekends were specifically for me. He didn't want Derek's toxic energy poisoning the learning environment he was trying to create, and he could see how much I needed a safe space away from my brother's constant psychological warfare. That's where I learned real skills that would actually matter in the real world: wiring, framing, rebuilding engines, welding, and how to use power tools safely and effectively. Stephen treated me like a junior partner in his business rather than just some kid who was getting in the way. He would explain exactly why we did things certain ways, the reasoning behind different techniques, and the importance of taking pride in quality workmanship. Most importantly, he let me make mistakes without screaming at me or making me feel like an idiot for not knowing something I'd never been taught. That's also where I met Nathan, who was Stephen's business partner's son, and someone who was dealing with his own version of family pressure and disappointment. Nathan's dad was this incredibly successful surgeon who had mapped out his son's entire life from birth, expecting Nathan to follow exactly the same path and become a doctor just like him. But Nathan wanted to be an engineer and design things that would make people's lives better, rather than spending his career cutting people open and dealing with medical emergencies. We bonded immediately over being the disappointing sons who didn't fit our family's predetermined molds and expectations. Nathan was this skinny kid with thick glasses who looked like he'd never seen the inside of a gym, but he could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded and explain exactly how computer processors worked at the molecular level. His father saw him as a complete failure because he didn't want to spend his life in operating rooms, viewing his son's interests as somehow beneath their family's social status. "My old man thinks engineering is just applied mediocrity," Nathan told me one weekend while we were installing a new sound system in Stephen's truck. He says anyone who's smart enough to be an engineer should be smart enough to be a doctor instead. According to him, I'm wasting my intelligence on toys and gadgets when I could be saving lives and making real money. Nathan became the brother I should have had all along, someone who treated me as an equal rather than Derek's defective younger model. We would work on projects together for hours, cover for each other when family drama was hitting particularly hard, and most importantly, he treated me with the respect and friendship that I had never experienced with anyone my own age. Having someone who understood what it was like to be the family disappointment made everything more bearable. "Your brother's a complete piece of shit," Nathan told me one day while we were troubleshooting a computer that had been giving us problems for hours. "But you're going to be something really special someday. You've got that rare thing where you can see how stuff actually works instead of just memorizing what you're supposed to do. That's a gift that can't be taught." Stephen's workshop became my sanctuary, the one place where I could actually relax and focus on building things instead of constantly watching my back for Derek's next psychological or physical attack. Every other weekend, I could breathe easily and think about creating something positive rather than just surviving until the next day. It was the difference between living and merely existing. "You've got natural mechanical intelligence," Stephen told me after I had figured out why his table saw was vibrating and fixed it by adjusting the belt tension, something that had been bothering him for weeks. "That's something you're born with, and it can't be taught in any classroom. Derek's never going to have that natural understanding no matter how many wrestling matches he wins or how many trophies he collects." More importantly, Stephen was teaching me through his own example that success didn't require destroying other people or stepping on them to climb higher. His construction crews respected him because he was competent and fair, not because he intimidated them or ruled through fear. His business was growing steadily because he consistently did quality work and treated his clients with respect, not because he cut corners or screwed over his competitors to get ahead. Those weekends at Steven's place were the only times I felt like I could actually be myself, instead of just existing as Derek's weird little brother who served as his personal punching bag. Steven saw potential in me that my own parents refused to acknowledge, and he was willing to invest his time and energy in helping me develop skills that would actually matter in my adult life. The final straw that completely shattered any remaining hope I had for my family came during the spring of my junior year, when I had been working on this incredibly complex robotics project for the state competition. I wasn't just throwing together some basic Lego Mindstorms kit robot like most of the other competitors. I was building a seriously sophisticated piece of engineering from scratch, using parts that I had purchased with money earned from working weekends with Steven's construction crew. This was a legitimate autonomous navigation robot with a custom Arduino control system, ultrasonic sensors for obstacle detection, GPS navigation capabilities, and programming that I had written myself after months of studying online tutorials and experimenting with different approaches. I had spent countless hours designing the chassis to be both lightweight and durable, programming complex navigation algorithms that could adapt to different environments, and fine-tuning the sensor array to work together seamlessly. The robot was legitimately impressive work that had real scholarship potential and could have opened doors to engineering programs at top universities. This thing could navigate complex obstacle courses that would challenge professional systems, map unknown environments in real time, and execute precise movement patterns with accuracy that impressed even Steven's contractor friends. I had programmed it to respond to voice commands, avoid moving obstacles dynamically, and even return to its exact starting position from anywhere in a mapped area using nothing but its own sensors and processing power. This was college-level robotics engineering that I had taught myself through pure determination, online tutorials, and countless hours of trial and error. Steven was incredibly proud of what I had accomplished and would bring his contractor friends by just to show them what I was working on. "This is professional-grade stuff," he would tell anyone who would listen. "This kid's got engineering talent that most college graduates don't have after 4 years of formal education." Derek discovered the robot in my room on a Saturday night when his girlfriend Vanessa and 2 of his meathead wrestling teammates were over for one of their so-called study sessions, which were really just excuses to drink my parents' beer and make as much noise as possible. I was upstairs in my room working on the final programming details for the competition when I heard Derek's voice getting louder and more animated than usual. "Yo, come check this out," Derek called to his friends, his voice carrying that particular tone that always meant trouble was brewing. Little bro's been building robots in his spare time. Pretty nerdy stuff, but actually kinda cool when you look at it up close. I came downstairs to find them clustered around my workbench, with Derek holding my robot like he had just discovered some interesting artifact. The casual way he was handling months of precision work made my stomach drop immediately. I knew that look in his eyes, and I could see the wheels turning as he calculated exactly how to turn the situation into maximum entertainment for his audience. "Careful with that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and non-confrontational. "It's for the state competition next week, and some of those components are really delicate." "Relax, little bro," Derek said with that predatory grin that I had learned to fear over the years. "I'm not going to break your little toy. I'm just showing my friends what you've been working on up here all this time." But something in his expression had shifted in a way that made my blood run cold. I could see that familiar look he got when he was about to destroy something I cared about, that dead-eyed calculation that meant he was already planning how to inflict maximum psychological damage while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. "Actually, this is pretty impressive work," Derek continued, his voice taking on that fake enthusiasm that always preceded his most devastating attacks. "Vanessa, you're good with Instagram, right? This would make a really sick post for my account. Check out this amazing robot I built for the state competition." "Derek, no," I said, panic creeping into my voice as I realized exactly where this was heading. "That's not yours. You can't just claim credit for months of my work." "Can't just what?" Derek's voice went ice cold, and that dead-eyed psychopath expression took complete control of his features. "Can't be proud of my family's achievements? Can't share cool stuff with my friends who are interested in what we're working on?" His teammates were already snickering, sensing the shift in energy and anticipating the entertainment that was about to unfold. Vanessa had her phone out and was already filming Derek posing with my robot like he was some kind of tech genius who had created this masterpiece himself. "This is months of work," I said, desperation making my voice crack in a way that I knew would only encourage Derek's cruelty. "It's my only shot at a decent scholarship opportunity. Please just put it down and let me get back to the final programming." "You know what? You're absolutely right," Derek said with that terrifying calm that always preceded his most vicious attacks. "This is your work, your months of effort and dedication. You should definitely have it back." The moment hung in the air like a held breath, and I knew with absolute certainty what was coming but felt completely powerless to stop it. Derek spiked my robot on the hardwood floor with the same triumphant energy he used when celebrating the winning pin of his wrestling career. Months of precision engineering exploded into dozens of pieces right before my eyes, circuit boards cracking with sickening snaps, sensors scattering across the floor like expensive confetti, and delicate wiring systems that had taken me weeks to perfect getting tangled and destroyed beyond any hope of repair. But Derek wasn't finished with his performance. He started systematically stomping on the wreckage with his heavy boots, grinding delicate components into the hardwood floor while maintaining direct eye contact with me. His friends were filming the entire destruction on their phones, laughing and cheering like they were watching the most entertaining show of their lives. The sound of expensive electronics being crushed under Derek's boots was like listening to my future being destroyed in real time. "Oops," Derek said with mock concern, surveying the carnage he had just created. "Guess your little toy wasn't as tough as you thought it was. Maybe next time you should build something that can handle the real world instead of hiding in your room with your nerdy projects." Something in my brain just completely snapped at that moment. All those years of taking his systematic abuse, all those times I had backed down and let him win, all the humiliation and psychological torture I had endured. It all exploded out of me at once in a rage that felt like it might actually kill me. I charged at him without thinking, which was exactly what Derek had been hoping for all along. He caught me mid-tackle like I was a practice dummy in one of his wrestling drills, easily redirecting my momentum and introducing my face to the wall hard enough to crack the drywall and leave a dent that would be visible for years. Then he grabbed me by the throat with one massive hand and started systematically working me over while his audience cheered and continued filming the entire beating. "This is what happens when you forget your place in this house," Derek said between punches, his voice eerily calm despite the violence he was inflicting. "This is what you get for thinking you actually matter, or that your little projects are worth anyone's time or attention." When the beating was finally over, I was curled up on the floor in a pool of my own blood, with my nose clearly broken and my ribs feeling like they might be cracked. Derek stood over me like a conquering warrior, breathing hard but looking completely satisfied with his work. His friends were high-fiving him like he had just won the Super Bowl, congratulating him on his performance and asking if they could get copies of the videos they had recorded. "Clean this mess up," Derek told me, gesturing casually to the robot wreckage scattered across the room. "And next time remember who's actually in charge around here. Maybe this will teach you not to get ideas above your station." When my parents rushed in after hearing the commotion, they found me bleeding on the floor surrounded by destroyed electronics, and their first instinct was immediate damage control for Derek's reputation and future prospects. They weren't concerned about whether I needed medical attention, or if anything was seriously injured. They were worried about how this might look to Derek's wrestling teammates, and what story might get back to coaches or college recruiters. "What did you do to embarrass your brother in front of his friends?" my mother demanded, not even bothering to check if I was seriously hurt or needed to go to the hospital. "Why can't you just leave him alone when he has company over? You know how important his social connections are for his future." My father was even worse than my mother, immediately starting to apologize to Derek's teammates for my inappropriate behavior and complete lack of respect for family hierarchy. He was actually thanking them for being understanding about having to witness such an uncomfortable family situation. "Sorry, boys, little brother doesn't understand boundaries yet," Dad said while I was still spitting blood onto their precious hardwood floors. "Sometimes you have to teach these lessons the hard way, but hopefully he'll remember this one." Derek's friends were absolutely eating up this response, talking about how cool my parents were and how Derek was lucky to have family that actually understood him and supported his position as the alpha male of the household. My mother was nodding along enthusiastically, actually thanking Derek for keeping me in line and apologizing to Vanessa for having to witness my tantrum and inappropriate behavior. They made me clean up all the robot pieces while I was still bleeding from my broken nose, forcing me to gather up months of destroyed work with shaking hands while Derek and his friends watched and made jokes about my pathetic appearance. Then they sent me to my room to think about what I had done and reflect on my inappropriate behavior, while Derek and his teammates got to stay downstairs where they were treated to pizza and praised for handling the situation so maturely. That night, lying in bed with what I was pretty sure were cracked ribs and a face that looked like abstract art, I could hear them laughing about the whole incident downstairs. My own parents were actually joking with Derek's friends about how I had finally learned my lesson and probably wouldn't act up again anytime soon. They were genuinely proud of what had happened, treating it like an example of good parenting and effective family discipline. That's when I made the phone call that would change everything. I called Uncle Stephen with trembling hands, barely able to speak through my swollen lips, and the emotional devastation of realizing that my own family would never protect me from Derek's violence. "Pack everything important right now," Stephen said without any hesitation after I managed to explain what had happened. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, and don't let them talk you out of this decision. This ends tonight." Stephen showed up in his pickup truck exactly when he promised, took one look at my battered face, and his expression went from concerned to absolutely murderous. He didn't say a single word to my parents, who were watching from the living room window, but didn't have the courage to come outside and face him directly. Stephen just helped me load my belongings into his truck and drove me away from that house of horrors forever. Jesus Christ, Stephen said once we were safely away from my parents' house, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. How long has this level of abuse been going on? And don't try to minimize it. I can see exactly what that psychopath did to you. I told him everything during that drive. Not just the robot incident, but years of systematic psychological and physical abuse that my parents had not only allowed but actively encouraged. Stephen listened in silence, his jaw getting tighter with every detail I shared about Derek's cruelty and my parents' complete failure to protect me. "You're staying with me permanently," Stephen said when I finished my story, his voice shaking with rage. "I'll handle all the legal paperwork and custody issues. Your parents obviously can't be trusted to keep you safe, and I'm not letting you go back to that situation ever again." Nathan was waiting at Stephen's place with ice packs and genuine concern instead of lectures about what I had done wrong or how I should have handled the situation differently. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who were actually angry on my behalf rather than angry at me for existing. Stephen got emergency custody of me without much of a fight from my parents, who were actually relieved to have me off their hands so they could focus completely on Derek's wrestling career without the distraction of their problem child. I moved into Stephen's house permanently and started at a new school where I could walk down hallways without constantly watching my back for Derek's next attack. At my new school, I could actually focus on my classes without wondering what Derek would destroy or sabotage next. I could participate in activities and make friends without worrying about Derek showing up to humiliate me in front of everyone. Nathan transferred to my school as well, and we started building our future together while working summers learning real construction and business skills from Stephen. We started a small computer repair service that actually made decent money. Nothing crazy, but honest work that I was genuinely good at, and that taught me valuable lessons about running a business and dealing with customers. For 2 years, life was actually good for the first time I could remember. I had a family that supported me, friends who respected me, and a future that didn't involve constant fear and humiliation. Then Stephen got the news that would change everything again. It started with Stephen feeling tired all the time and losing weight without trying to diet or change his eating habits. He had always been this powerhouse of energy who could work 12-hour days without breaking a sweat. But suddenly he was struggling to keep up with basic job site demands and falling asleep during business meetings. When the fatigue got bad enough that he was literally falling asleep during important client meetings, Nathan finally convinced him to see a doctor and get some blood work done to figure out what was wrong. The diagnosis was stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him maybe 18 months with aggressive treatment, and possibly much less time if the cancer had already spread beyond what they could detect with current imaging technology. "Well, that's not exactly ideal," Stephen said after the oncologist delivered this devastating news, maintaining his sense of humor even while facing a death sentence. Even when confronting his own mortality, the guy was making jokes to keep everyone else from completely falling apart. You'd think this devastating news would bring the family together, right? That facing the loss of a loved one would make people put aside petty differences and focus on what really mattered in life. You'd be completely wrong about that assumption. My parents' reaction to Stephen's terminal cancer diagnosis was a masterclass in narcissistic selfishness that somehow managed to surprise me even after years of witnessing their cruelty. Their first concern wasn't Stephen's health, his comfort during treatment, or how to support him through this terrifying ordeal. Instead, they were worried about how his illness would affect their social standing and financial situation. "This is so difficult for us," my mother complained during their one and only visit to Stephen's house after the diagnosis. "Having to deal with cancer in the family when we're already stressed about Derek's college recruitment process. It's just one more thing we have to worry about when we're already stretched thin emotionally." My father was even more direct about what his real concerns were regarding Stephen's situation. "What's going to happen to the business when he paused, not wanting to say, "when you die" out loud in front of Stephen. I mean, Stephen's got a lot of valuable assets tied up in that construction company. Somebody needs to think practically about what happens to all of that when the time comes. Here was Stephen facing his own mortality, dealing with the terror of knowing he had limited time left on Earth, and they were already calculating how his death might financially benefit them. But Derek was in a completely different league when it came to displaying pure cruelty and sociopathic behavior. When word got around school that my uncle was seriously sick with cancer, Derek actually told people that Stephen probably deserved what was happening to him for choosing a lifestyle that led to cancer. According to Derek's twisted logic, Stephen's illness was some kind of cosmic justice for interfering with our family's natural dynamics. When I confronted him about these comments during one of his rare visits home from college prep wrestling camp, Derek just shrugged like he was discussing something as mundane as the weather forecast. "Look, I'm not saying I'm happy about it," Derek said with that same dead-eyed expression that had terrified me throughout my childhood. But maybe this will teach him not to interfere with family business that doesn't concern him. He never should have gotten involved with your drama in the first place. This was the man who had literally saved my life, who had shown me what real family actually looked like, who had given me hope for a future beyond constant abuse and humiliation. And Derek was essentially saying that Stephen deserved to die for the crime of caring about me and protecting me from their systematic cruelty. I moved back in with Stephen full-time to help him through his treatment and make sure he wasn't facing this battle alone. Nathan and I took turns driving him to chemotherapy appointments, which were brutal sessions that left him weak and nauseous for days afterward. We managed his construction business when he was too sick to work, making sure his clients were taken care of and his crew had steady employment during this difficult transition. We made sure Stephen had everything he needed to stay as comfortable as possible: nutritious meals when he could keep food down, help with basic tasks when the treatment left him exhausted, and most importantly, the knowledge that he was surrounded by people who genuinely loved him. Meanwhile, my parents visited maybe twice during Stephen's entire illness, and they spent both visits complaining about how difficult everything was becoming for them personally. They couldn't focus on Derek's career advancement with all this medical drama happening in the family. They didn't have time to deal with these kinds of family obligations when they were already stretched thin, managing Derek's college recruitment process. Stephen bore it all with incredible grace and dignity that I still admire to this day. He never complained about the lack of support from his own brother, never expressed bitterness about their selfishness, and never made anyone feel guilty for not doing more. He just focused on making the most of whatever time he had left and making sure Nathan and I were prepared for whatever came next. Family isn't about blood, Stephen told me one night after a particularly brutal chemotherapy session that had left him barely able to keep water down. It's about who actually shows up when you need them most. You two have been more family to me than I had any right to expect, and I'm grateful for every day we've had together. The final blow came during Stephen's last few weeks when he was in the hospital, barely conscious most of the time due to the aggressive pain medication required to keep him comfortable. My parents finally showed up for what they knew would be their last visit, and instead of offering comfort, support, or even basic human decency, they chose that moment to deliver one final cruel message. My father walked into Stephen's hospital room and said, with Stephen lying there weak and dying, "You know, Stephen, maybe this is God's way of teaching you that family comes first. You never should have interfered with how we raised our boys." Stephen was too weak to respond to this absolutely heartless statement, but I saw the hurt flash across his eyes. That was the moment I realized my father wasn't just an enabler or a bad parent. He was genuinely cruel on a level that I hadn't fully comprehended until that moment. Here was his brother dying, and Dad's priority was making sure Stephen knew he'd been wrong to help me escape their abuse. I asked them to leave that day and told them not to come back to the hospital. Stephen deserved to spend his final days surrounded by people who actually loved him, not selfish parasites looking for ways to make his death about themselves and their own twisted sense of righteousness. Stephen passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, with me holding his hand while he slipped away peacefully. Nathan was there too, along with Martinez and a few other guys from his construction crew who had become like father figures to me over the years. These men had genuine tears in their eyes as they said goodbye to someone who had been a fair boss, a loyal friend, and a genuinely good person. My parents showed up for the funeral, of course, because appearances mattered to them even if genuine emotion didn't. They spent most of the service talking with Stephen's contractor friends and business associates about how difficult this loss was for them personally and how much they would miss their dear brother. It was a performance designed to maintain their social standing, rather than any genuine expression of grief. Derek came home from college for the funeral and spent the entire service texting on his phone, not even bothering to pretend he cared about Stephen's death. When people offered their condolences, he would give them this practiced sad smile and talk about how Stephen was finally at peace, delivering lines that sounded like they came from a greeting card rather than genuine emotion. A week later, Stephen's lawyer called to schedule a reading of the will. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning at Morrison's law office downtown. My parents showed up dressed in their best outfits, clearly expecting this to be a significant financial event that would benefit them substantially. Derek drove down from college, probably figuring he'd inherit enough money to cover his remaining tuition and maybe buy himself something nice. Morrison, a guy who had known Stephen for over 20 years and helped him build his business from nothing, got straight to business without any unnecessary pleasantries. Stephen was very specific about his wishes, Morrison began, pulling out a thick legal document that had clearly been carefully prepared. He updated this will 6 months ago when his diagnosis became terminal, and he wanted to make sure there would be no confusion about his intentions. Morrison started with some small bequests, specific tools and equipment going to various members of his crew, donations to local charities that Stephen had supported over the years, that sort of thing. Then, he dropped the bomb that would change my life forever. To my nephew, who showed me what family actually means, Morrison read in his clear, professional voice, "I leave my house, my construction business, all associated assets and equipment, and the remainder of my estate, including all savings and investment accounts. The silence in that room was absolutely deafening. I watched my parents go through about 6 different emotions in the span of 10 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, shock, anger, and finally pure rage as the implications of what they'd just heard sank in completely. "That can't be right," my father said, his voice shaking with a combination of disbelief and fury. "Stephen wouldn't leave everything to a teenager who's barely out of high school. There must be some kind of mistake in the paperwork." Morrison handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Stephen's familiar handwriting. "Stephen also left you this personal letter," he said with a slight smile that suggested he knew exactly what was inside. I opened the envelope with trembling hands while my parents sat there in complete shock, unable to process what was happening to their expectations. Stephen's handwriting was shaky from the illness, but every word was crystal clear and deliberate. "To my real son," the letter began, and I had to pause for a moment to keep from breaking down completely. "You showed me what family actually means when mine turned their backs on me during the most difficult time of my life. You were there when I needed you most, while the people who shared my blood treated me like a burden and an inconvenience." The letter continued. "You earned every bit of this inheritance by being the man they couldn't be. Build something amazing with this gift, and remember that you didn't just inherit money and property. You inherited the responsibility to be better than they were. The business is yours now, but Martinez and the crew have contracts guaranteeing their jobs for life. Take care of them like they took care of me." Then came the final line that made me smile even through my tears. "P.S. Your parents are going to lose their minds about this decision. Let them. You owe them absolutely nothing." The letter was like Stephen speaking to me from beyond the grave, validating every decision I had made and every sacrifice I had endured. It was his final gift to me, not just financial security, but the knowledge that the man I respected most in the world thought I had earned it. My parents absolutely lost their shit in that lawyer's office. "This is fraud!" my father was shouting, his face turning purple with rage. "Stephen was manipulated and coerced. He wasn't in his right mind when he wrote this. We'll contest this will in court." My mother was yelling about how unfair it all was, and how they deserved something substantial after everything they'd been through with Stephen's illness. According to her logic, they had suffered the most from his death and should be compensated accordingly. Derek was the worst of all, demanding that I share what Uncle Stephen stole from the family, because we were brothers and family should stick together during difficult times. The entitlement was absolutely unreal. These people who had treated Stephen like garbage while he was dying now felt they deserved his life's work simply because of shared DNA. "You were supposed to be the family failure," Derek said, his carefully maintained mask finally slipping completely off his face. "You were supposed to amount to nothing so the rest of us could feel good about our choices and our success. This isn't how it's supposed to work in our family." Morrison calmly explained that the will was completely ironclad and had been prepared specifically to prevent any legal challenges. Stephen had been of completely sound mind when he wrote it, had included specific provisions to prevent contests, and had documented years of evidence about my parents' neglect and Derek's systematic abuse. "Stephen was very thorough in his preparation," Morrison said with professional satisfaction. "He anticipated exactly this reaction and prepared accordingly. He spent months documenting everything to ensure his wishes would be respected." I walked out of that office with Stephen's house keys, business documents, and more money than I had ever imagined having in my entire life. More importantly, I walked out with the validation that the man I had respected most in the world thought I had earned every bit of it through my character and actions. My parents spent the next several months threatening to sue, hiring lawyers, and looking for any possible way to break Stephen's will, or find some legal loophole that would get them a piece of his estate. They never found one because Stephen had been too smart and too thorough in his planning. With Stephen's inheritance, I suddenly had options I never could have dreamed of having. I could pay for college without taking out loans, keep Stephen's construction business running successfully, and most importantly, I had the financial security to build the life I actually wanted instead of just surviving day to day. I decided to study computer science at the state university while keeping the construction business operational. Martinez stepped up as foreman and basically ran the day-to-day operations while I was in classes, and the crew was incredibly loyal to Stephen's memory. They worked their asses off to make sure his company continued thriving and growing. I expanded the computer repair service I had started with Nathan into a legitimate tech support business, serving Stephen's construction clients. We started offering services like network setup for job sites, digital project management systems, and security camera installations for both residential and commercial projects. Nathan stayed my business partner and best friend through everything. We commuted to college together, studied together, and spent summers growing both businesses while learning everything we could about running successful companies. Having someone who had been through the family dysfunction with me made everything so much easier to handle. Nathan understood the psychological damage that comes from being the family disappointment, and we could support each other through the challenges of building something positive from such a traumatic foundation. I met Maya during a computer science study group in my junior year. She was this brilliant programmer who was double majoring in computer science and mathematics, and she could debug code that had me stumped for hours. Maya was fundamentally different from any girl I had ever talked to before. She was genuinely interested in how things actually worked rather than just what they could do for her personally. When I told her about Steven's construction business and the tech support company Nathan and I were building, she didn't just nod politely like most people did. Maya wanted to visit job sites and understand how we managed complex projects with multiple moving parts. When I showed her the project management systems I had developed to coordinate between construction and tech support services, she immediately saw ways to improve the efficiency and user interface. "You've built something really impressive here," Maya told me after spending an entire weekend helping me upgrade our project management software. "Most people our age are just trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives after graduation. You're already doing it and doing it successfully." When I finally worked up the courage to tell her the whole story about my family situation, the abuse, Steven's death, the inheritance, and the complete breakdown of my relationship with my parents and Derek, Maya didn't pity me or treat me like I was damaged goods who needed to be handled carefully. Instead, she was genuinely impressed that I had survived all that systematic abuse and manipulation, and still managed to become a decent person who was building something positive with his life. "Most people who go through what you experienced either become abusers themselves or completely shut down emotionally," she said. "The fact that you came through it with your empathy and work ethic intact says everything about your character." We graduated together. Nathan with his engineering degree, me with my computer science degree, and Maya with both her majors plus job offers from 3 different major tech companies. She chose the local offer specifically because she wanted to stay and help grow what we had built together rather than moving to Silicon Valley for a bigger salary. Nathan became my official business partner in both the construction and tech support companies. We incorporated everything properly, brought Martinez in as a minority owner of the construction business as recognition for his years of loyal service, and started planning serious expansion into neighboring markets. Maya and I moved in together after graduation, getting a nice apartment near both our offices that gave us space to work from home when needed. For my 24th birthday, Maya surprised me with a golden retriever puppy from the local animal shelter. We named him Rex after the T-Rex in Toy Story, which somehow seemed perfectly fitting for our little family. Rex became the unofficial mascot for both businesses. The construction crews loved having him around job sites where his friendly presence helped put nervous clients at ease, and he had this amazing ability to calm down stressed customers when their computer networks crashed at the worst possible moments. 2 years later, I proposed to Maya on the deck of the house Steven had built with his own hands. I used my grandmother's ring that Steven had somehow convinced my parents to give him before they realized exactly how much the inheritance was actually worth. Maya said yes immediately, and we started planning the wedding we both actually wanted rather than the elaborate social performance my parents would have demanded. The wedding was small, but absolutely perfect. Maya's family was there, along with Nathan and his girlfriend Martinez, and some of the crew who had become like father figures to me over the years, plus a few close friends we had made in college. It was exactly the kind of celebration Steven would have loved. Genuine emotion, real relationships, and people who actually cared about each other. 3 months after the wedding, I was working late in my office, finishing up some network documentation for a major client, when my phone rang with an unknown number. Something made me answer it anyway, though I probably should have just let it go to voicemail. "Son, we saw the photos from your wedding." My father's voice came through the phone, shaky like he had been drinking heavily or crying for hours. "We can't believe you didn't invite your own family to such an important day in your life." The guilt trip was immediate and absolutely shameless. He went on about how I had broken my mother's heart by excluding them from my wedding, how Derek was devastated to miss his little brother's special day, and how they deserved to be there despite everything that had happened years ago. According to my father's version of reality, they were the wounded parties in this situation. "We know there were some difficulties when you were younger," Dad continued, his voice taking on that manipulative tone I remembered so well from my childhood. "But we're still your parents, and family should mean something, especially during important life events like weddings and major milestones." I let him talk, genuinely curious to see where this conversation was really going. I had learned enough about manipulative people over the years to know that this guilt trip was just the opening act, and the real reason for the call would come out eventually. It didn't take long to find out the truth behind their sudden interest in reconnecting with me. "The truth is, we need your help," he finally admitted, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine desperation. "Derek's in serious trouble right now. He got arrested for dealing steroids to high school kids through his coaching job, and he's looking at real prison time. We can't afford the kind of good lawyers he's going to need to fight these charges." There it was. After 7 years of absolutely no contact, after missing my wedding entirely, after treating Stephen like garbage while he was dying of cancer. They wanted me to bail out the golden child who had made my teenage years a living hell. We heard about Stephen's inheritance. My mother grabbed the phone at this point, her voice thick with tears that sounded more manipulative than genuine. We know you inherited substantial assets and that you're financially successful now. Derek's your brother. You have to help him get through this situation. Why would I do that? I asked, keeping my voice completely calm and neutral. Because we're family, Mom started sobbing dramatically. Despite everything that's happened between us, we're still your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. And now when we need help most, you're the only one who can save us from this disaster. You didn't raise me, I said quietly, letting that truth hang in the air between us. Stephen raised me. You just provided room and board while you enabled Derek's abuse. Please. Dad was begging now, all pretense of parental authority completely gone from his voice. Derek's learned his lesson. He knows he made terrible mistakes. He's changed completely. You're the only one who can afford good legal representation that might keep him out of prison. Let me ask you something, I said, feeling strangely calm and detached from the whole conversation. When Derek beat me unconscious and destroyed months of my work, did you think about saving me? When he systematically sabotaged every friendship I tried to make, did you care about my future? When Stephen was dying and you told him he deserved it for helping me, did family mean anything to you then? The silence stretched until it became genuinely uncomfortable. I could hear both of them breathing heavily on the other end of the line, probably trying to figure out how to respond to questions that exposed the fundamental cruelty of their past behavior. We made mistakes, Mom whispered finally. We know that now, but Derek's looking at 10 years in federal prison. His whole life will be completely ruined if he goes to jail. You're successful now. You have money. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive and help your family. I already did forgive, I said, surprised by how true that statement felt. I forgave you years ago because carrying that anger was poisoning my own life and preventing me from building something positive. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm obligated to rescue you from the consequences of your choices. You can't just abandon family when they need you most, Dad shouted, his desperation turning to anger as he realized I wasn't going to cave to their emotional manipulation. You enabled years of systematic abuse because it was easier than admitting you'd raised a monster. I continued, cutting him off before he could build momentum. You treated the one man who actually cared about me like garbage because he threatened your narrative about Derek being special and destined for greatness. That's not fair, Mom started to protest. You had a son who would have done anything for his family, I continued, not letting her finish her objection. Someone who worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and actually gave a damn about other people's well-being. Instead, you chose to invest everything in the psychopath who's now facing federal drug charges. You threw away the wrong kid. We're sorry. Mom was sobbing now, her voice breaking with what might have been genuine remorse. We know we made terrible mistakes in how we handled things, but Derek's our son too. He needs help, and you're the only one who can provide it. Please. Dad was crying now too, this broken man who had once stood by while his golden child tortured me. He's your brother, and blood has to mean something. We're begging you to help us save him. I could hear both of them crying on the other end of the line. These broken people who had once held absolute power over my life and used it to enable systematic cruelty. The sound of their desperation should have made me feel something. Maybe satisfaction, maybe pity, but instead I just felt empty and resolved. Don't call me again, I said firmly. Don't show up anywhere near me, don't contact my wife, and don't try to reach me through my businesses. Derek dug his own grave with his choices. Let him lie in it. Then I hung up the phone and blocked all of their numbers. Derek called me personally 2 days later from county jail, crying and begging like a frightened child. The tough guy persona was completely gone, replaced by this whimpering, desperate person who was suddenly discovering what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. He was sobbing about how sorry he was for everything he had done to me, how he had learned his lesson and found God in jail, and how he would do anything to make things right between us. It was almost surreal hearing this broken voice coming from someone who had once seemed so powerful and intimidating. Remember what you used to tell me? I asked him calmly, that I needed to learn my place in the world. Please don't do this, Derek whimpered. Well, I learned it, I continued. My place is running 2 successful businesses, living in the house Stephen built with his own hands, and being surrounded by people who actually give a damn about me and my well-being. Your place is exactly where you belong, behind bars, forgotten, and completely irrelevant to anyone who matters. Please, Derek sobbed, his voice breaking completely. I know I was terrible to you growing up. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm scared about what's going to happen to me in prison. I don't know if I can survive it. You should have thought about that before you decided to deal drugs to high school kids, I said, feeling no satisfaction in his terror, but also no sympathy. Actions have consequences, Derek. You're finally learning that lesson that everyone else learned years ago. I'll do anything, he begged desperately. I'll apologize publicly for everything I did to you. I'll admit everything in front of everyone. I'll make it right somehow, I promise. There is no making it right, I said quietly. You can't unbreak what you destroyed. You can't give me back my confidence, my projects, my teenage years, or my relationship with my parents. The damage you did is permanent and irreversible. But we're brothers, he said, playing his last card. No, I said firmly. We're not brothers. You were my biggest bully who happened to live in the same house as me. There's a difference. I hung up and blocked his number too. 6 months later, I heard through Nathan's dad, who still had connections in their old social circle, that Derek had taken a plea deal for 8 years in federal prison. My parents lost their apartment and had to move in with my mother's sister in another state because they couldn't afford rent after spending all their savings on Derek's legal fees. My father's attempts to restart his own construction business failed miserably because word had gotten around the industry about how he had treated Stephen during his illness. Nobody wanted to work with someone who had shown such cruelty to a dying family member. Meanwhile, Maya and I had just closed on a bigger house in the same neighborhood where Stephen used to live. Martinez was planning to retire next year, and we were already organizing a retirement party that was going to be absolutely legendary. Nathan and his wife were expecting their first child and had asked Maya and me to be godparents. I had built exactly the life Stephen always said I deserved, surrounded by people who respected me, working on projects that mattered, and contributing something positive to the world rather than just taking from it. The contrast between my life and the chaos my biological family had created for themselves was almost poetic in its justice. The golden child, who was supposed to be the family's pride and joy, was sitting in a federal prison cell, learning what real consequences felt like for the first time in his life. The parents who had enabled his cruelty were struggling to pay rent and facing the reality that their investment in the wrong son had cost them everything. And me? The family failure, the disappointment, the kid who was supposed to amount to nothing? I was living proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just building something better and walking away from the people who tried to tear you down.